month is one that I'm particularly looking forward to. As a father of 6 kids, we're going to be talking to someone who has me beat in that area, has a little bit of parenting expertise, and I think you parents are going to love it. Our guest today did a guest blog on Ziglar Family. You may recognize his name from there. He was a guest on the Ziglar Show, I believe, not too long ago.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you may know him from his best-selling books, QBQ, The Question Behind the Question, for one. John G. Miller, so glad you could be with us today. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Bill, thanks for having me. Great to be on today.
Well, it's a pleasure. I want to jump right in because so many parents today are wrestling with the cultural influences we see. It seems like it's becoming more difficult to raise children that actually are ready to be adults. And so you have written about this, your latest book, Raising Accountable Kids. You wrote it with your wife, Karen, I believe.
Yes.
Talk to us. What prompted this book, given your background and your story?
First of all, Bill, let me say that if you ever want to talk about teamwork, try to write a book with your spouse.
Ah, yes.
Because if you're not careful, you get into, well, I don't like that paragraph. Well, that sentence is horrible.
And you're still married, right?
And we're still married. We've been married since June of 1980.
Oh, wow.
We're still going pretty strong. Yes, we have 7 kids. We only have you beat by 1, Bill. So let's call it a draw.
Let's do that. And we already found out we both have bearded dragons at one point in the household, so we're good there too.
Well, I've been a reptile fan for a long time, but that's another show.
Yes, exactly. So what prompted the writing of this book, Raising Accountable Kids?
Let me give your listeners and your viewers some background, because I think that's important, because we didn't just one day decide, hey, we're experts in parenting. Let's write a parenting book.
Yes.
I came out of Cornell in 1980 and joined a big company called Cargill, very fine firm. And I sat at a desk for 5 years, and we lived in some real Garden City spots like Mankato, Minnesota, Great Falls, Montana, where our first child was born, Kristen, who coincidentally is now on my team, has been out speaking on the QBQ message for 9 years. It's hard to believe that I had her join us when she was 25. But then we moved to St. Louis for a few months, and then back to Minneapolis. And somewhere in there, I was disillusioned with the corporate life, the 8 to 5, the politics, the only getting a raise if somebody liked you, that kind of stuff. That's the way I felt. Sure. I was 27 years old, and one day a friend said, you should be in sales. And I said, not me in sales. Well, he had spotted something I hadn't seen. And I did have maybe the gift of gab, or some verbal skills, and the desire to persuade, and the desire to hit really big goals, and all those things salespeople need. We used to call it the fire in the belly, Bill, fire in the belly.
Yes.
And I had that. So I happened to find a career selling training, of all things, which married a couple gifts of mine together, but I didn't know it at the time. One was teaching, and the other was selling. So I was able to sell training, go out and do training and facilitate training, and the target audience was executives and middle managers. And that was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I did that for almost 10 years and did pretty well. And in 1995, one day, I looked at my wife while we were on the Radisson Diamond cruise ship out of Puerto Rico on a cruise, one of our cruises. I'd won this award because I was like the top sales guy and all that. Like Zig Ziglar says, I was trying to see everybody at the top.
Yes, exactly.
and I said to Karen, it's time for me to go off on my own. And the short story is, I left my mentor, went off on my own and set up shop and started teaching a bunch of different things. But one thing I was teaching was this little idea I had come up with called the question behind the question. And the market shortened it to QBQ. And I'd actually taught it to a medical device company in Minnesota in 1994, a year before I left my mentor. And they grabbed a hold of it and started using it. And I probably should have recognized then, wow, I've really got something here.
Right.
And by teaching the question behind the question and helping people really get on the path of personal accountability, they said, John, this is really good stuff, the client said. So I soon left. My mentor went off on my own and started teaching a bunch of stuff, but I was always covering the QBQ. And within a year or so, I learned everybody was grabbing the QBQ over anything else I covered. Bill, I could cover the 7 steps to trust building and the 19 characteristics of leadership. But what people would say is, wow, that QBQ, that really stuck with me. And of course, the question behind the question, some of your fans know, is all about personal accountability, how to get rid of 3 traps: victim thinking, procrastination, and blame. So I was out in the corporate world teaching this material, and here's what would happen. I'd go to State Farm, and I'd speak to a group of 200, and of course, 80% of any audience is a mom or our moms and dads. And so people would come up and say, wow, I can use this at home, I think, but do you have it in a parenting format? Well, for years we didn't. And I would try to stress to people, you don't really need it in a parenting format. You can apply QBQ at home, and many people did. But finally, we got around to writing a book that took QBQ, the message of personal accountability, and tied it to being a mom or a dad. And that's where Raising Accountable Kids came out. And it's a paperback, and you can, get it on Amazon or QBQ.com, lots of places. But bottom line, this is the most important premise you can walk away with if you read Raising Accountable Kids. Let me give it to you right now. Okay. My child is a product of my parenting. Period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no Hollywood to blame. There's no celebrities. There's no sports stars. There's no president of the United States to point fingers at. It's not Congress. It's not the local church. It's not the youth leaders. It's not my neighbors. It's not grandma and grandpa. And it's not the coaches at on the athletic team. It is my role as a parent to engage in no excuses parenting and say, my child is a product of my parenting. And the reason we are pretty black and white on that, Bill, is because the minute you say, well, okay, my child is partly a product of my parenting, we have just opened the door to blame the world for how our kids turn out. So it's all about personal accountability. And until mom and dad practice personal accountability, we will never raise accountable kids.
Yeah, I love that. So in a nutshell, Raising Accountable Kids starts with becoming an accountable parent, right?
I'm sorry, Bill. I don't do nutshells. I'm a speaker.
Right, that's true.
Raising Accountable Kids is about raising kids today who are going to fight the winds of the world. And the world is blowing entitlement and victim thinking into our families every single day. But we believe, and this is what we teach in Raising Accountable Kids, we believe in strong parenting as opposed to weak parenting, W-E-A-K. Now, what does that mean? Well, bottom line, the strong parent still establishes boundaries. Their no's still mean no. They still take responsibility for how their kids are turning out. They don't blame the world. They are strong, accountable parents. Weak parents basically have said, hey, there's nothing I can do. My teenagers are going to act out because they all do. Well, we say baloney to that. Right.
So your message is one that's empowering parents. I love how you talk about parenting being a learned skill and contrasting that with mom and dads who just wing it. Right? Who maybe they feel like they're either too busy or they're overwhelmed or whatever the reason might be, they feel like I'm just going to try to survive until they move out. But that's not where you're coming from. That's not where Ziglar Family is coming from. Certainly not where Zig Ziglar was coming from. So tell us about that, about what's that look like to be an intentional parent?
Well, obviously you've read the book. Thank you very much. Bottom line, I'm a trainer. I've been in training since 1986. People do struggle to change. We all do. We're shaped by our families, and there are societal pressures. We understand that. But committed individuals say, I can learn new skills. I can do different things. I can be a better me today than I was yesterday. We're in the training business, Bill. You are, and we are at QBQ Inc. So when it comes to parenting, why in the world would we wing it? The most important job we are ever given. In fact, we're not given it, we're choosing it. We choose to be a mom or a dad. Why would we not choose to find the books we need to learn better skills? Why would we not choose to go to the seminars? Why would we not choose to, and this is a key point, sit at the feet of some gray-haired folks who have gone before you and done a good job parenting? Here's what we see, and I suspect this will offend some of the younger parents on this program, but I beseech you, younger parents, stop reaching out on Facebook for answers. There aren't any.
Yes.
Please, this is what we see. We see millennial and Gen X parents saying to other millennial and Gen X parents, my 3-year-old just ran through the living room carrying a steak knife. What should I do? and my wife and I are going, really? Really? You don't know what to do? Well, then you better go talk to your mom or dad or your grandma and grandpa or a neighbor that you respect, but sit at the feet of wisdom where parents have gone before you and they've learned to manage their children in an appropriate fashion. Seek answers. Bottom line, Bill, parenting is a skill. You wouldn't want a surgeon to work on you who's winged it. I don't want a mom or a dad trying to raise children without saying, okay, today I will ask the QBQ, the question behind the question, what can I do to be my very best? And the answer often is to learn something new.
That is so good. One of the things we provide as part of the Thrive community is a monthly community coaching call where members can submit questions such as, what do I do if my child's running through the living room with a steak knife? And things like that. But you're absolutely right. I've seen that so many times, parents turning to other new parents in the hopes of getting advice rather than turning to those who've been there and done that. So let's dive into that a little bit on a very practical level. If a parent's listening right now saying, yes, that's what I want for my kids, that's what I want more accountable children. Obviously, I want them to get the book and dive into the details, but can you give us kind of big picture? What are some things that they can be thinking about? How do I put this into practice? How do I go about this? What are the first steps? How do I make this happen in my family?
Yeah. Interesting thing, as I've done a lot of interviews now on the parenting book, I find, and you didn't ask it this way, but some people want a specific formula. Exactly. When my child does X, please give me the Y. The Y, and not the Y, W-H-Y, but the Y. He does X, I need to know why. Why I would, that's not a great...
Sure, I got it.
Yeah. Everybody's thinking, why? but people want a specific formula. When my child does this, what should I do? Give me the 6 steps. Well, there aren't always 6 steps. There's not even always one step. It's principle-based. It's coming back to me saying, wait a minute, who's in charge right now? Who's in charge? And this is the question parents are afraid to ask. They're afraid to say, well, Bill, some of the parents today were raised on a program, TV show called Charles in Charge.
Yes.
You could now name their family's child in charge. It is really a bad movement we have out there in the parenting. Everything has become about the child. Everything has become about the child's feelings. Everything has become about the child's activities. There are times, it's like, stop the madness. Please, mom and dad, take back your life, take back your houses and homes, take back your family, and recognize no child wants to be in charge. God did not build a single child to be your boss. You must stay in the boss position. Do not give up the mantle of leadership. So what that comes, if you buy that principle, then when your child does X, you'll say, wait a minute, I'm in charge here. And then when you tell that child, stop doing that, no, or maybe you establish a consequence, you will stick with it because you realize the child is not in charge of the moment you are in charge. And that's, I can't say this strongly enough, Bill, and I'm sorry if I'm yelling into my mic, but the child desperately wants boundaries. That's not new. Dr. Dobson was talking about that 40 years ago. The child desperately wants the parent to say no. We put out on our Facebook page a blog or an image once that said something like, this is the parent talking to the child, I promise to you I will be strong by making my no's mean no. And that is exactly what the child needs and wants. So a lot of our book comes down to the principles of parenting. Do you accept personal accountability? Are you in charge? Do you recognize it's a learned skill? Do you understand that your child is a product of your parenting? You know, Bill, if you don't buy any of that, don't read the book.
Right.
Because you can go to a seminar, a full-day seminar on the 6 steps to parenting your child, but if you're still going to blame the world for how your child turns out, or let the child be the boss of you, then those techniques aren't going to work anyway. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to deal with a 2 or a 3-year-old who's hitting someone else.
Right.
But until you accept the responsibility that it's your job to shape that child and train him up as he should go and start doing it today, you're not going to do it anyway. So forget all the technique. You need to buy the fact that you're responsible for how that child is developing, period.
I love so much of that. And I especially love that idea that the child doesn't want to be in charge, because every signal that they might give will tell you something different. Would you agree with that? And parents can be confused by that, thinking, well, that's what they really want. And our culture tells us, don't disappoint them, give them what they want so they'll be healthy. And we love our kids. We want them to turn out great. And so I think sometimes parents feel kind of like ping pong balls or pinball game, kind of going back and forth. Well, this person said and that person said, but a child doesn't want to be in charge. No. And yet that's what we're conditioning parents to think, that the child is in charge. You know, I had a book come out last month I wrote with Dr. Everett Piper called Not a Daycare, about what's happening on college campuses, right? Where it seems like what's happening on college campuses is kids have been brought up thinking we're in charge. And then they arrive at college, try to interact with the real world, and things don't go so well. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how important is this to help kids to understand, to be able to function in reality, in the real world, and prepare them for that?
Well, that's a lot of stuff you just asked. I'll go back to raising accountable kids.
Yes.
And recognizing it's our job to shape them as when they're 2, when they're 4, when they're 6, when they're 8. See, sometimes people say to us, well, should I use sticker charts or rewards? You know, none of that matters until you buy the fact that it's your job to train the child. Okay. Once I do that, then I need to be looking in the mirror and asking QBQ. So let's return to the QBQ if we could. Because I'll give you an example right out of the book. This is what Raising Accountable Kids looks like. And here are some of the lousy questions we hear parents ask. I'll just give you an example. Why doesn't my daughter ever take my advice? Wouldn't it be better to ask, what can I do to get to know her better? We're talking like an older child here. Sure. When will my son open up to me? Well, how can I build a more trusting relationship? Who made the mess in here? What parent hasn't asked that? What can I do to help my child learn good habits? Who will save me from these kids? That's just kind of there for fun. How can I find joy in being with my children? Do you know how many parents are thankful that school starts again because they can't wait to get rid of their kids? I don't mean to sound judgmental, but my wife and I always found that to be a very sad thing. If you're excited to get rid of your kids back to childcare or back to school. Now, don't get me wrong. We have 7 of these things. Right. And you have 6. So of course kids can be tiring and frustrating at times.
Sure.
But if you don't find joy in parenting, you better turn your thinking around fast.
Yes.
Why won't my children obey me? What can I do to set clear expectations and consequences and follow through? So if you understand personal accountability and how the QBQ brings it to life, you then understand it's in the questions I ask. So am I asking, when is my teenage son going to do this? When will my toddler do that? When will my preschool? Wait a minute, parent. What about you looking in the mirror and saying, what can I do right now to learn a new skill? What can I do right now to be in charge? How can I, at this moment, develop my child to become one day a responsible adult? These are the questions, and that's what QBQ is all about. So if you go back to my history quickly, I was out teaching QBQ to adults in the corporate world, and that's when people started saying, I want to go home and use this as a mom or a dad. So we took the same concepts of victim thinking, procrastination, and blame and brought them over to parenting. So let me give you an example. Victim thinking. Why don't my kids ever listen to me? All I've said as a mom or a dad is right now, I'm a victim.
Mm.
Why won't the schools give us more support? Why won't the schools end bullying? I'm sorry. That's not a school responsibility. That's a parental responsibility. Then we might switch to the when questions. When will my son start getting his act together? When will my 3-year-old stop throwing tantrums? When will my 9-year-old get up on time on his own for school? Well, that's procrastination. When I start asking when questions, I've said, I'm not going to take action. I'm going to wait for others to handle this problem. So you got to be very careful with when questions, parents. As we say in the book, almost every parenting problem, almost every, is best handled now, not later. And then there's the whole blame thing. Well, who's going to do this and who's going to do that and who dropped the ball and who made the mistake? So the minute we start asking whodunit questions in the home, we are creating a culture of fear. Now, Bill, I don't know your background. I don't know where you worked when you were 20 and 30 something, because I know you're only 40 now. Okay. But wherever you work, can you imagine working in the corporate world with a culture of fear? Well, parents have brought that into the homes as well. So sometimes we have parents that are too weak, but then we have parents who just scream and yell and have created a culture of fear. That's not good parenting either. So again, on an interview like this, it's hard to give this formulas. Sure. But what we can do is I hope sell moms and dads on this concept. I'm responsible for my children, period.
And in fact, beyond that, if you want the kind of family that you dream of, it begins with accepting that responsibility.
Yes. And I've got to say this, if I could real quickly.
Yes.
Moms and dads out there, if you're tired, if you're fatigued, if you're really just stressed and drained, you're doing it to yourself. It's kind of a fascinating and ironic, maybe it's a paradox or a conundrum, but the more the kids are in control, the more the parents are out of control. So thus, the more tired the parents become. The minute a parent starts drawing those lines and drawing those boundaries and enforcing them and no's mean no, they get their energy back. There's nothing more tiring than being out of control and letting our kids being in control. This is what we find with younger parents. I'm talking to the younger parents now, okay? They have decided that firm means harsh. Sorry, firm is what your child wants. Firm and loving. If you have to add that phrase, we'll call it firm but loving. But I've talked to young parents, and Karen has talked to young parents, and they have actually said, well, if I'm firm and I enforce that consequence, aren't I being harsh? I don't know where this belief came from, but the answer is no, you're parenting.
That is so good. By the way, in my previous life, I led a school for 12 years as a principal. So
now you know all about it.
Everything that you're telling me, I've lived firsthand with countless families on all sides of the spectrums. Ones that had the accountability squared away, and others that came in looking to blame somebody. And without exception, every single time, the kids who emerged the healthiest were the parents who took responsibility.
Yeah. There's a famous cartoon, I don't know if you've seen it, and one part of the cartoon shows in the 1960s, the parents are holding a report card that has like an F on it, and they're confronting the child.
Yes.
And then in the next frame, it's today, 2017, and the parents are holding a poor report card and they're confronting and yelling at the teacher.
Yes.
I don't know when that took place, but we've got a story in the Raising Accountable Kids book about a parent who came, their daughter was expelled or suspended. And you can relate to this as a principal.
Sure.
And the parent came in and started yelling at the principal for expelling her daughter. And my daughter, who was in 10th grade at the time, said you could hear the parent yelling all the way down the hall. Yes. Can you imagine, Bill, the parent was actually blaming the school for her daughter getting suspended. That is exactly what we're talking about here. Parents, take charge.
Yep. Totally agree. So how can parents tell? I mean, what are some of the signs that, hey, I have an accountability problem in my home? Maybe they're listening to this thinking, is that me? Is that not me? I mean, what are some of the symptoms that you've seen that kind of alert you or can alert parents, hey, this is something I should lean into and find out more, because if I did, I could deal with some of these problems that I'm seeing.
Well, let me make it a business example at first, because almost everybody probably has employment. Let's say you're a salesperson and your numbers are down. You haven't sold as much this year. And at the end of the year, you look at your boss and you say, well, my numbers are down because our prices are too high. My numbers are down because we don't have the right brochures like our competitors do. Our numbers are down because our product is no good. My numbers are down is because the marketing department hasn't supported us with good advertising. I mean, right now, Bill, your listeners are hearing, well, that's just excuse making. Excuses. Right. You wouldn't allow that if you were a sales manager. Have we allowed excuse making in our home? We say in the book, parents, accountable parents don't make excuses, but neither do they accept excuses. Now, we understand stuff happens, and there are reasons for things happening. We understand that. But it's an attitude. Do we allow our 12-year-old to say, well, I failed the test because the teacher didn't teach well? Or do we help that child turn that thinking around and say, I failed the test because I didn't study hard enough? Now back to the parent. Well, I haven't enforced that consequence I put in last week because life is so busy and I just don't have time or whatever. And all of a sudden they're making excuses for how they're not parenting in a strong fashion. So I think one of the very first things moms and dads can do during this interview and after is just, hey, have I been making excuses lately for my parenting? Have I allowed my children to make excuses? And one thing they can do, and this is in the book, is to start deciding their absolutes. Now, if you hear the word absolute, there's no equivocation there, Bill.
Right.
An absolute is an absolute. So I'll give you a random example. When our kids were under, in our home still, and our kids right now are 34 down to 18, but we had an absolute. We do not go to R-rated movies. We've seen other parents take their kids to R-rated movies. That's their decision.
Sure.
In our home, we didn't take our children. We didn't attend R-rated movies. It was an absolute. You've got to decide as a mom or a dad, what are your absolutes? Because if you don't have absolutes, then you start sliding down that slippery slope of the gray area, shades of gray, and then all of a sudden we're into excuse making and we're not parenting in a strong fashion because we set an absolute in our mind, but we didn't stick to it. Well, guess what? It was never an absolute. It's like drawing a line in the sand and then letting it be washed out to sea. We have got to have absolutes in our parenting. What is it that we expect? One example that came to mind is we had some guests over once, and one of our children in her teens was having a bad day, and she didn't treat the guests real nicely. She wasn't polite. She didn't say, how do you do, that kind of thing. We dealt with that later because we basically said, in this home, we are polite and kind to our guests, period. Yes. That's an absolute. So it gave us a handle. It gave us something to talk about. It gave us something to deal with. And without the absolutes, what are the rules? What are the guidelines? Where are the boundaries? You've got to have those absolutes. So look to yourself to see, are you making excuses and have you defined absolutes? That's all in the book.
That is such good stuff. I was going to ask you for a piece of practical advice, but man, you just gave one there of identify those absolutes and get clear on those ahead of time so that when the decisions come, there isn't a decision to be made. You just have to maintain your position.
Right. Sorry, we don't do that here.
That's similar to in our Families That Win course. We talk about using contracts for kids with technology. And basically the concept is you're just making clear expectations, laying out those absolutes on the front end so that there's no argument about it as we move forward. And I love the message, what you're saying here. So what would you say to the parent who says, hey, I'm hearing you, I'm actually thinking, I've been making excuses, but there's this one excuse that's just hanging on. I just feel like I'm too busy to get my head around this. I've got work, I've got commitments, I've got all this stuff, and it's just a whirlwind. As we kind of bring this to a close, what would you say to that parent who's just feels like they're lost in that maelstrom of life events right now?
I actually don't think you're targeting the one chapter, but I'm going to mention the one chapter called Family Stress is a Choice. Family stress is a choice. For years in my corporate life, I've been teaching the concept, the phrase I coined, I think, stress is a choice. Stress is a choice. And sometimes people would fight it. And we have a story in the new version of the QBQ book, and I'll just show that. This is the original QBQ book. Okay. I mean, this is the new version of my first book.
Right.
There's a story in there about a woman who heard me at FedEx in Toronto, Canada say, stress is a choice. And she emailed me that day and said, I don't believe it. I believe the world creates my stress. And I'm going to prove you wrong. Well, Bill, she was a client because she sat in my audience. So what are you going to say? You're going to say, okay, Sylvia, great. Let me know what you think. I wasn't going to argue with her. Well, a month later, she emailed me and she said, John, I have discovered that stress is a choice. Every time I was feeling angry, frustrated, overly busy, stretched and stressed, I realized I was doing it to myself. So we took that concept over to families. We are not here to judge. Our kids did guitar and dance and soccer, but you've got to have limits. You've got to have controls in place. You've got to decide where is too much, when is too much. And if you, the parent, are shirking on your parenting duties and not raising up accountable children because you're just too busy, then you better make a change, because guess what? This parenting job wasn't thrown upon you. You chose it. You chose it. It's like we tell people who work somewhere, you chose to work at the XYZ company. Stop complaining.
Right. Yes.
You chose to work here. If you don't want to work here, quit. Go somewhere else. Okay, now we're not telling parents to quit. But you chose the job of parenting. So don't be saying I'm too busy to parent. Say I've got to change my life so I can parent effectively. That's personal accountability. And that's what the book, Raising Accountable Kids, is all about.
So we've just scratched the surface of your message, of the book, and all these things. So tell us, we're going to have links to your books and materials in this post so people can easily get those. But tell us more about how people can connect with you more, how they can find out more about your message.
Sure.
How can they get plugged into what you're doing?
You bet. Well, QBQ.com is our website. And we've got, of course, the original QBQ book. We've got a book called Outstanding, 47 Ways to Make Your Organization Exceptional. That's about a lot of ideas for your company. We've got the Raising Accountable Kids book. Flipping the Switch is the companion book to QBQ. And I'll say quite honestly, it's the most forgotten book. And yet when people find it, they realize it takes QBQ to the next level. And then we have a brand new workbook out that can help people at home or work really create some personal application of the QBQ. All of these are found at QBQ.com and, of course, online resellers. But I want you to know, Bill, I respond, as I'm sure you do, to every email I get. So if your listeners and viewers want to email me, john@qbq.com, it's just that simple, john@qbq.com, I will respond. QBQ.com,
John@QBQ.com, if you want to reach out to John specifically, and very generous of you to make that available to people and be helpful there. As I'm listening to that, I'm thinking there have got to be some wives listening right now whose husbands are in the corporate world or vice versa. In other words, so they speak that corporate language. This is a great opportunity to package a couple of those resources together, get QBQ and Raising Accountable Kids, put them together, and bring those two worlds together. It's something we talk about a lot with Ziglar as well, who did a fantastic job of exemplifying that. So absolutely.
And Bill, could I add one thought?
Yes, please.
I mentioned to you by email that I've been on the Dave Ramsey show a few times because QBQ is a required read for his staff. And many of your listeners might know Dave Ramsey, but Dave always likes to ask, John, what's the number one thing people take away from QBQ? And I just want to share this as we close here too.
Please.
It's this, and it's not rocket science. Okay, Bill? I can only change me. It is remarkable. Everybody knows that, but when they go through QBQ's training or the book or Raising Accountable Kids, whatever, here's what happens. We're frustrated with our kids, our spouse, our boss, our colleagues. If only these people would change. And when they experience QBQ, there's something in the material that sells them. It convicts them on, wait a minute, I can only change John Miller. What can I do today to change me? And that is the number one takeaway from all our parents. So if you're frustrated with your 12-year-old, look in the mirror and say, how can I change me today to help my 12-year-old grow into an accountable adult.
So that is the ultimate question behind a question for parents. It isn't, how can I fix my kids? It's how can I change me, right?
Yeah, sometimes people think the parenting book is for their kid. No, Mom and Dad. The parenting book is for you.
Yeah, so parents, don't buy Raising Accountable Kids and put it on your child's bedside table. It's
right.
Not going to work.
Right.
John, I thank you so much for this. And
Sure.
I suspect we could talk for hours on parenting and all the implications of it with that. But I so appreciate you taking the time to do this. We look forward to hearing more from you in the Ziglar family community. And just love what you're doing. So appreciate your time today.